She looked me dead in the eyes, hand and finger straight to my face on the dinner table I had just set, and said, calm as a woman reading a grocery list, Brandon, me and the girls will be moving back in with Chris. We've made our decision. Not I've made my decision. Like it had been a group project. Like the three of them had been workshopping the exit for months. My name is Brandon Cole. I'm 41 years old. I built my career in commercial real estate from a single rental property I bought at 26 with money I'd saved working construction summers during college. I'm not a man who flinches easily. But I will tell you honestly, in that moment with the pot roast still warm on the stove and our 9-year wedding anniversary 3 days away, something behind my sternum simply went cold. I didn't yell. I didn't knock anything over. I set my fork down on the table the way my father taught me to set things down when your hands want to shake. Slowly, deliberately, like the weight of the object matters. And then I looked past Meg to the two women seated at my table. Sophia, 24. Lillian, 22. My daughters, the word I'd used without hesitation for 19 years. They were smiling. Not nervously. Not apologetically. The way you smile when a long flight finally lands. Relieved. Unburdened. Like I was the turbulence they'd been enduring. I looked at all three of them and I said quietly, almost gently, okay. I hope you find what you're looking for. Meg blinked. I watched her recalibrate in real time. She had prepared for tears, for begging, maybe for rage. She had not prepared for this. What none of them knew, what I had made absolutely certain they would never suspect, was that I had been ready for this exact moment for 4 months. After Meg carried her suitcase to the car, I asked Sophia and Lillian to sit with me for a moment. Just a moment. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to perform grief for their benefit. I simply wanted to understand, because even then, even with everything I already knew, some part of me needed to hear it from their mouths. I sat across from them at the same table where I had helped Sophia with her college applications. The same table where Lillian had cried over her first broken heart and I had stayed up past midnight just being present because sometimes presence is the only language that works. I asked them quietly, did I do something wrong? Was there something I missed? Lillian shrugged. Not a small, uncomfortable shrug. A full, loose-shouldered shrug, the kind that says the question itself is an inconvenience. It was always going to end up this way, Brandon. Brandon. Not Dad. Not even close. Sophia was already on her phone. She glanced up just long enough to say, you'll be fine. You have your money, and then looked back down like I was a conversation she'd already closed. I sat with that for a second. You have your money. 9 years of school pickups and soccer games and 10 p.m. ice cream runs and emergency calls and college tuition paid without a single form or loan application. And what they had distilled me down to in the end was a balance sheet. I told them, and I meant it completely, whatever happens next, I want you both to be okay. They mistook it for weakness. I could see it in the way Sophia's mouth curved slightly, the way Lillian straightened like she'd just been handed confirmation of something she'd always suspected. They thought my calmness was defeat. They left without hugging me. I closed the front door, stood in the hallway for exactly 10 seconds, and then picked up my phone and sent one word to my attorney, David Hartley. Now. What they didn't know, what nobody at that table could have known, was that 3 weeks after I discovered the affair, a friend of mine named Marcus, an IT consultant I'd known since college, had recovered a deleted file from our shared family cloud account. A shared planning note. A thread between Meg, Sophia, and Lillian that dated back 8 months before Meg ever rolled that suitcase to the door. 8 months. Long before I found out. Long before any of this had a name. In that thread, Meg had laid out the plan with the kind of precision that told me this wasn't impulsive. Wait until after the anniversary trip. Have Chris ready. File citing emotional neglect. Use the daughters as character witnesses. Leverage the trust funds in the settlement while framing Brandon as a controlling father who used money as power. Lillian's contribution to the thread, he won't fight it. He's too proud to look messy in court. Sophia's, just make sure we get the beach house. I promised the girls a summer there. I had read that thread twice, forwarded it to David, then gone to my home gym and lifted until my arms gave out. So when Sophia said you have your money and walked out my front door, she wasn't wrong. I did have my money. Every single cent of it. Because I had made sure of that 4 months ago. She called me at 7:43 a.m. I know the exact time because I was already awake, already dressed, already on my second cup of coffee on the back porch watching the yard I had landscaped with my own hands 3 summers ago. I had not slept particularly well, not because I was broken but because there is a specific kind of exhaustion that comes after years of carrying something heavy finally gets set down. My body didn't quite know what stillness felt like yet. I let it ring twice before I answered. What did you do to the accounts? No good morning. No name. Just that, sharp and slightly breathless, the voice of a woman who had reached for something she was certain would be there and found empty air instead. I told her calmly that I had exercised Section 4B of our prenuptial agreement, the financial protection clause that activated upon confirmed infidelity. I told her that David Hartley had filed the supporting documentation at 8 a.m. that morning, which was technically in 4 minutes, but David is extraordinarily punctual. I told her the joint accounts were frozen. Both of them. I told her the credit cards linked to my accounts had been canceled the previous evening. I told her the girls' trust funds had been placed in administrative review pending court proceedings and that she would receive formal written documentation by end of day. The silence on her end lasted long enough that I checked the screen to confirm the call was still connected. You can't do this. Have a good morning, Meg. I hung up. I want to be honest about something because this story deserves honesty more than it deserves performance. I did not feel triumphant in that moment. I did not pump my fist or smile at the yard. What I felt was closer to exhaustion, the specific grief of a man who had loved genuinely and discovered the love had been inventory all along. What Meg had never taken seriously, what her friends had laughed about at her bachelorette party 9 years ago while she waved her hand dismissively, was the prenuptial agreement itself. I remember hearing secondhand that she joked about it. He's so paranoid. So unromantic. Her friends had laughed. She had signed it without reading past page 3, despite her attorney flagging the infidelity clause specifically, underlining it, asking her twice if she understood its implications. She had waved him off. What Meg didn't know, because I had never told her in full, was where that prenup came from. Not from paranoia. Not from distrust of her specifically. It came from a Tuesday afternoon when I was 16 years old, standing in a hardware store in Decatur, Georgia, watching my father, Gerald Cole, a man who had built a regional construction company worth $4.2 million from a single borrowed truck and 18-hour workdays, scan lumber prices on a part-time hardware store salary at age 52. My parents' divorce had taken everything. Not because my father was careless, but because he had loved so completely that the idea of protecting himself from the person he loved had felt like a contradiction. His attorney had recommended a prenup. My father had said, she would never do that to me. She did. I had stood in that hardware store watching him work and made a promise to myself that was less about cynicism and more about survival. Love fully. But never let love make you stupid. The prenup wasn't a wall I built against Meg. It was a monument to my father's suffering that I carried quietly into every room of my marriage. Meg had signed it like it was a formality. At 8:01 a.m. my phone buzzed. A text from David, filed. Clock is running. I finished my coffee. The yard looked the same as it always had. I looked at it for another few minutes, then went inside and made breakfast. Meg arrived 2 days later with a moving van, her attorney, and both daughters flanking her like a security detail. A neighbor across the street, Mrs. Patterson, was watering plants she'd already watered that morning. I noticed. People always find reasons to witness things they sense will be worth remembering. I let them in without argument. I stepped aside at the door, calm, hands in my pockets. Sophia brushed past me with that same loose confidence she'd carried out 2 nights ago. She said, without looking at me, "You should have just let us go quietly, Brandon." I let her take 3 more steps into the hallway. Then I spoke. "There's something you should know before you leave with anything." All 3 of them turned. My voice was level. Not cold, level. There is a difference. Cold is anger wearing a mask. What I felt was simply clarity. I'm not your biological father. I adopted both of you, when Sophia was 5 and Lillian was 3. I did it because I loved your mother, and because 2 little girls deserved stability their biological father had already walked away from. The adoption records are sealed, but my attorney holds the originals. You'll want your legal team aware of this before making any inheritance claims. The moving van sat idle outside. Sophia's face didn't crumble dramatically. It was slower than that, like watching something structural give way. Lillian's hand found the doorframe. Meg looked like a woman who had just realized the board she'd been standing on was never as solid as she'd measured. Mrs. Patterson later told her sister she didn't know what was said inside. But she watched Sophia and Lillian sit down on the front steps and not move for close to an hour. I went to the kitchen. I made coffee. I let David's team supervise the removal of personal items per the court-approved list. I had chosen them. Specifically, deliberately, completely. And I had never once held that over them, until they made it necessary. My husband is a cold, controlling, financially abusive man who used money to keep me and my daughters trapped. That was the opening line of Meg's 12-minute Facebook video, posted on a Thursday evening and shared into 7 local community groups before midnight. Sophia added a TikTok. Lillian posted a series of Instagram stories with her voice breaking on cue. By Friday morning it had traction, comments flooding in from people who knew only what they'd been given. I posted nothing. Not because I was afraid. Because I had learned from watching my father's divorce that public emotion is evidence, and evidence belongs in courtrooms, not comment sections. David Hartley filed a defamation preservation notice within hours, timestamping every post, archiving every share, adding them as exhibits to our court file. Each video Meg posted was another brick she was handing us to build the wall around her. Then David released a single 2-paragraph statement to a local journalist named Karen Yates who had reached out for comment. It said only that Brandon Cole had been the subject of a coordinated misrepresentation campaign by his estranged wife and daughters, and that the court record would speak for itself. Karen Yates pulled the court filings. They were public record. The prenup clause. The frozen accounts. The forensic accounting report showing $47,000 moved to a private account over 14 months. And Exhibit C, the group chat thread. 8 months of coordinated financial planning predating any divorce filing. The story inverted by Saturday. Meg's comment sections filled with people who had read the filings. Chris quietly deleted his supportive comment on her original video. Sophia's TikTok went from sympathy to skepticism in the replies within 48 hours. What Meg had intended as a public execution of my reputation had become a searchable, time-stamped, algorithmically distributed confession of intent. She had handed Karen Yates the story. Karen Yates had simply reported all of it. Your Honor, my client signed this agreement under significant emotional pressure from a financially dominant partner who used contractual language as a mechanism of control. Meg's attorney delivered this with practiced gravity. He was good, I'll give him that. He had the kind of voice that fills a courtroom without straining. The Honorable Patricia Wynne, 58 years old, silver-haired, and possessing the expression of a woman who had heard every variation of every argument in every divorce proceeding for 23 years, looked at him over her reading glasses and said nothing for 4 full seconds. Then she looked down at the documents before her. David Hartley stood and submitted 3 items. First, the group chat thread. 8 months of documented planning between Meg, Sophia, and Lillian, predating any divorce filing, demonstrating coordinated financial strategy. Second, a sworn affidavit from Chris Davenport confirming that Meg had promised him a portion of the divorce settlement in exchange for his cooperation in the affair. Third, a forensic accounting report prepared by a certified examiner showing $47,000 in marital funds transferred to a private account registered in Meg's maiden name over 14 months. Judge Wynne read the affidavit. Set it down. Looked at Meg's attorney with an expression that wasn't hostile, it was simply done. Counsel, your client's filings characterize Mr. Cole as financially abusive. Would you like to address Exhibit C before we proceed? Meg's attorney asked for a brief recess. Judge Wynne denied it without looking up. We'll proceed. I didn't look at Meg during any of this. Not out of cruelty, I had simply made a decision weeks earlier that I would not spend any more of my attention on reading her reactions. I had given 9 years of attention to Meg's emotional weather. I was done forecasting. David leaned slightly toward me and said nothing. He didn't need to. We both knew what the next hearing would look like. Outside the courthouse, Meg sat in her attorney's car for 40 minutes before driving away. She told me there would be money. She said Brandon was too proud to fight it and that he'd settle fast to avoid the embarrassment. Chris Davenport said this into a courtroom microphone on a Wednesday morning in November, wearing a gray suit that didn't quite fit in the shoulders, reading occasionally from a prepared statement his own attorney had helped him draft in exchange for immunity from civil action. He had cooperated fully. Every text, every voicemail, every wire transfer discussion. The voicemail David played, authenticated, time-stamped, Meg's voice without question, lasted 47 seconds. The part the courtroom remembered was this: Brandon is so proud he'll never let this get ugly. And when he settles, you and I are set. The room was very quiet after that. I looked at my hands. I had made a decision not to look at Meg during testimony, but in that specific moment I broke it. Just once, just briefly. She was staring at the table in front of her. Her attorney had his pen pressed to his lips. He wasn't writing anything. A reporter in the gallery later asked me on the courthouse steps how I had felt hearing that recording. I told her the truth. Sad. Mostly just sad. 9 years. And somewhere inside all of it, she was always calculating the exit. What I didn't tell the reporter, what I have never told anyone in full, was about the 3 nights immediately after I had first discovered the affair. The 3 nights I couldn't make myself sleep in my own house. I had driven to a hotel 20 minutes away and sat in the parking lot for hours each night, not checking in, just sitting. Not angry. Just hollow. I thought about Sophia climbing into my lap at age 5 asking for a book. Lillian jumping into my arms after her first soccer goal, bypassing every teammate to get to me specifically. I wept in that parking lot. Alone. 3 nights in a row. Then on the 4th morning I checked in, ordered room service, opened my laptop and started building the case. Some grief you hold privately. It doesn't make it smaller. It makes it yours. The court finds in favor of the petitioner in full. Judge Patricia Wynn read the ruling on a Thursday morning with the same measured cadence she applied to everything. No performance, no pause for drama. Just words landing in a quiet room like stones dropping into still water. The prenuptial agreement, upheld entirely. The infidelity clause, legally binding and correctly invoked. The $47,000 in misappropriated marital funds, to be returned in full, per forensic accounting documentation. Meg would receive no alimony. No settlement. No access to frozen joint accounts. Her attorney's argument of emotional duress had been considered and rejected. The court noted that Meg had been represented by independent legal counsel at the time of signing, that her attorney had flagged the relevant clauses, and that she had proceeded voluntarily. The daughter's trust funds, established by me voluntarily requiring no legal obligation, were permanently revoked under the gross breach clause David had argued. The group chat thread was cited directly in the ruling as dispositive evidence of coordinated intent to exploit a fiduciary family relationship. The beach house in Destin, mine. The investment portfolio, mine. The primary residence, mine, with Meg permitted 30 days to vacate. Her vehicle remained hers along with its $14,000 outstanding loan balance, which was now entirely her responsibility. I heard Sophia make a sound somewhere behind me, not crying exactly, more like the sound of something collapsing inward. The beach house summer she had promised her friends. The trust fund that had been funding her life without her working for 2 years. Gone. Both of them. In one Thursday morning. Outside the courthouse, Meg's attorney said quietly, "I did warn you about the prenup." Meg said nothing. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her look. Not in a way that satisfied me. In a way that just made the whole thing feel like wreckage, which is exactly what it was. By month 2 of living in Chris's house, he was asking Meg to contribute to household expenses. This was not the arrangement Meg had envisioned. The arrangement Meg had envisioned involved a settlement, a beach house summer, and a chapter of her life that looked better than the one she'd left. What she got instead was a guest room, a man increasingly aware that the $200,000 he'd been promised was a number that existed only in a voicemail that had now been played in open court, and 2 adult daughters occupying his 2nd and 3rd bedrooms like the consequences of a plan that hadn't accounted for failure. By month 3, a neighbor called a non-emergency line about noise from Chris's address. Meg applied for a hotel management position, the industry she'd worked before I came into her life, before stability became something she lived inside rather than worked toward. The hiring manager conducted a standard background check and pulled up local news coverage. Meg's name was attached to the trial story, the defamation filing, the forensic accounting findings. She never received a callback. Sophia discovered that barista wages operate in a different universe than trust fund disbursements. She moved into a smaller apartment and called her college roommate for the first time in over a year, not to catch up but to ask if she knew anyone hiring. Lillian adapted faster than either of them, which told me something about her that I had always suspected even when she disappointed me most. She had been quietly taking night classes while the trust fund covered her days. She picked up a part-time position at a physical therapy clinic. The work humbled her in ways that nothing else had managed to yet. The smear campaign videos were still online. Employers Googled. The videos did not help. I knew none of this in real time. I had moved on deliberately, the way you move on when you've already grieved the loss before it was officially a loss. But I heard pieces of it later. And what struck me wasn't satisfaction. It was recognition. Reality has a patience that outlasts every plan made against it. 14 months after the ruling, I sold the house. Not because I had to. Because every room in it held an echo I was no longer interested in living inside. The kitchen where I'd made pot roast the night she announced she was leaving. The hallway where Lillian had said Brandon like my name was a stranger's. The back porch where I'd taken the call at 7:43 a.m. and felt the cold satisfaction of a thing finally finished. I sold it, took a consulting partnership with a Gulf Coast development firm, and moved to Sarasota, Florida. I bought a smaller house than I could afford, deliberately. 3 bedrooms, a screened lanai, an orange tree in the backyard that had no practical purpose and was entirely the reason I chose the property. I ran in the mornings. I cooked actual meals instead of the functional eating I'd been doing for months. I read novels I'd bought years ago and never opened because there had always been something more urgent demanding my attention. There was a woman named Renee, a landscape architect I met through the development firm. She was direct, quietly funny, and had exactly zero interest in discussing my previous marriage on our 3rd date. When I told her about the prenup, briefly, she said Meg was a fool and then changed the subject with the efficiency of someone who understood that other people's wreckage doesn't have to be your permanent landscape. I laughed. Genuinely. I hadn't realized how long it had been. My father Gerald came down for a week. 74 years old, moving slower than I like to acknowledge, still with that particular quietness he'd developed in the hardware store years. The quietness of a man who had rebuilt himself from scratch and never made noise about it. We sat on the lanai drinking sweet tea. He looked at the orange tree and said, "Your mother would have liked this place." I said, "Yeah. She would have." It was the most peace either of us had held in a very long time. It arrived on a Saturday morning, handwritten, return address from a zip code I didn't immediately place. I almost set it aside. I had developed a habit in Florida of not rushing toward things, of letting the morning settle before I introduced anything into it that required emotional energy. I made coffee first, took it to the lanai, watched a bird work at something in the orange tree for a few minutes. Then I opened it. 3 pages. Lillian's handwriting. I recognized it from years of grocery lists left on the fridge, from birthday cards, from a note she'd once tucked into my jacket pocket before a business trip that said simply, "Come back soon, Dad." I had kept that note in my desk drawer for years without telling anyone. The handwriting here was shakier. Like she had started and stopped multiple times before committing to the page. She wrote that she had been in therapy for 14 months. That the work had involved tracing back the story she had told herself about me, the version Meg had been quietly constructing for years, and examining it honestly. That what she found underneath the constructed version was a man who had shown up, consistently, without condition, without ever once holding the adoption over their heads even when he had every right to. She wrote about things I had almost forgotten. The ice cream at 10 p.m. on a school night. The kitchen table conversation when she was 12 and a classmate had said her dad wasn't real, and I had told her, "I chose you. Some dads are assigned. I picked you specifically." She didn't ask for money. Didn't mention the trust fund. Asked for nothing except to be heard. She ended with, "I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed you to know I know what I did. And that the man who drove me for ice cream at 10 p.m. was the best father I've ever had. The only real one." I read it twice. Set it on the table. Looked at the orange tree for a long time. Then I called David Hartley, not about anything legal. Just to hear a familiar voice. 18 months after the letter, I drove up to Tampa to meet them for lunch. Neutral ground, their suggestion, which told me something about how seriously they were taking it. I arrived first, took a corner table, ordered water, and waited with the particular stillness I had spent 2 years learning. They walked in together. Sophia looked different, less polished, more present. There was something in her face that hadn't been there before, something that looked like the result of actual living rather than the performance of it. She had been working hotel management for a year. Lillian was weeks from completing her physical therapy certification. She carried herself like someone who had earned the ground beneath her feet. We didn't hug immediately. The history between us was too specific for easy warmth, and all 3 of us understood that. We sat. We ordered. We talked carefully at first, around the edges of things, and then gradually, honestly, about all of it. Sophia cried twice. Once when she talked about reading the court documents herself, actually reading them, not through Meg's filter, and understanding for the first time what had been planned and what I had quietly endured. The second time she didn't explain. She just wiped her eyes and kept talking. Near the end of the meal, Lillian reached into her bag and placed an envelope on the table. Inside, 2 personal checks. One from each of them. Modest amounts. Not close to what had been spent over 19 years. But earned. Genuinely hourly wage, tired on a Friday, earned. "We know it's not even close," Sophia said. "We're paying it back. Every month. For as long as it takes." I looked at those checks for a long moment. Then I slid them back. "Keep them. Put them toward your certifications." Lillian started to object. "I never needed the money," I said. "I needed to know you understood why it mattered." I looked at both of them, these women who had been 4 and 2 years old when I'd first heard about them, 5 and 3 when Sophia climbed into my lap and asked for a book. I think you do now. We stayed 2 more hours. No agenda. Just people who had hurt each other and were choosing, slowly, to build something different from the remains. Driving back to Sarasota that evening, I passed a hardware store on the highway. The same chain my father had worked at age 52, quietly rebuilding a life that had been taken from him by love he hadn't protected. I slowed down without meaning to. Then I pressed the accelerator. Some things you carry for a long time because they deserve to be carried. And some things, when the time is exactly right, you finally, completely set down. I set it down on that highway somewhere between Tampa and Sarasota, on an ordinary evening with the windows open and the Florida air coming in warm and salt-edged. And I kept driving.